Okay, but I want to introduce myself. My name is Jamie Sennett, and I work in the Alumni Engagement Office here at Illinois State. Thank you all for joining us. And like I said, I'm anticipating a few more joining us as we go along. I think we're in for a real treat today. I am sure today's session will leave us enlightened and inspired. Amelia Franck Meyer, Dr. Amelia Franck Meyer, welcomes your questions throughout today's program. So feel free to ask questions. You can use the question and answer, the chat, and she's also allowed you the ability to unmute yourself. She would like today's session to be open and interactive. So encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity of gaining from her expertise. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Amelia Franck Meyer, as she is a two-time alum from Illinois State University in 1989 and then again in 1995 with her master's. So we always love showcasing the expertise of our alums. She is also the founder and CEO of a national nonprofit, Alia, Innovations for People and Systems Impacted by Childhood Trauma. Her company works with child welfare leaders who are innovators and early adapters in jurisdictions around the country and the globe to create transformational change in child welfare. To say her work has been an impact is keeping it mild, to say the least. She is award-winning. She has received numerous accolades for her work. Perhaps most notably, she was recognized as one of People magazine's 25 Women Changing the World in 2018. And has widely been viewed on her TEDx talk on the human need for belonging. And then, of course, in 2018, she was recognized as our very own prestigious Alumni Achievement Award recipient. So without further ado, Amelia, welcome.
Thanks, Jamie. It's good to see you, Greg, and some familiar faces on here. And since we're a small and intimate crowd, I'll encourage you to turn your cameras on and to interact. I'm going to ask you to use the chat feature. And if you just want to shout out a question or a comment, feel free. I'm usually on these webinars as you are, and kind of, sitting in my seat waiting for the show to happen, but I'd like you to be part of the show. And so if you can join me, that'd be great. And as a colleague of mine refers to it, I'll thank you for including me and this time in your screen diet for the week. Because we're all taking quite a bit in. And so to still be at it on a Friday, I appreciate it. And also thanks for your flexibility as we rescheduled this because of the national events of the week. Flexibility and adaptability are going to be key important components of crushing it in 2021. So without further ado, we'll get started. I don't like PowerPoints on Zoom because then I lose all of your faces, but there are a few things that I'll use, and then I'll toggle back and forth between them. But I do need a few pieces of visual information. And so the title of this is Crushing It in 2021. We were tossing around titles, but in these times of the interim. And I really want to focus on that idea of the interim, of this time in between where we were and where we will be. And none of us really know that yet. We know what has ended. We don't yet know what has begun or will begin, and the ways that these times are impacting us right now. And so I think it's a real time of reflection for all of us. And I'll ask you to join me in thinking through a few questions and reflecting a bit and adding into chat as we think about the future. To begin, I just want to do a word of introduction about this interim and give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So by way of introduction, I'll tell you that I'm not currently who I was, and I don't yet know who I will be, but I do know a few things about that. And the first thing I want to share is that, this was my holiday card. This is me crushing it at the end of 2020 with a family that's all put together and clean and relatively coordinated outfits and the children and smiling faces and my holiday card said holiday card, and it had this picture, and then the next picture was this one, which said real life and versus real life. And that's really, how as I were thinking about crushing it in 2021, really thinking about it in this way, because we really weren't crushing it most of the time. Um, we weren't crushing it in a lot of ways during the pandemic. It's really the picture of real life versus this kind of juxtaposed picture of the kids driving me crazy, of my husband on a podcast and disengaged, the guinea pig being used as a tool of annoyance from my daughter to my son, and them screaming and not sitting still for photos. And so that's what 2020 looked like for me at the end. And so part of what I want to say is, what does it mean to be crushing it? Because crushing it for me was my kids were healthy and happy. We spent a lot of time together. We had more meals together than really ever before. I traveled quite a bit for my work prior to last year, and everything stopped in March, and I was grounded. I cooked more than I've ever cooked and experimented. And as my kids will tell you, um, they report, Mom, you became a good cook in 2020. It's one of our favorite things that happened. I experimented with new recipes. We played more card games. We played more board games. And we said, I love you to each other and to people we care about much, much more frequently in 2020 than we did in 2019, because we knew that it might be at risk. We knew that things were changing, that people we loved, we were losing, that the world was shifting in rapid ways that were unpredictable. And so we began to focus in on what was most important. And so I ask you to think, as we start talking about how to crush it in 2021, what exactly does it mean to crush it? Does it mean to have the perfect family? Because nobody believes you. Nobody believes you. Nobody believes that first picture on the card. It's just some kind of a, point in time miracle that I could get them to sit still and smile for one of the pictures, right? And so, and if crushing it is getting it right all of the time, then the questions I want to ask next are, at what cost? At your own personal health and exhaustion, at the guilt. What did you compromise? What did you have to let go of? What values or boundaries had to be breached to get it perfect? So as we think about crushing it, I ask you to think about what's really most important to you. What does it mean to succeed? And what are you willing to sacrifice for that to happen? Right? Really thinking about that. So for a moment, what is your measure of success? And that's how you'll know if you've met your goals and expectations. My house was not as clean as it was in previous years in 2019. I'm sorry, in 2020, it wasn't as clean as it was in 2019. But to be honest with you, it didn't matter to me. And so I decided at the end of this pandemic, I had one singular focus. I had a singular focus was to come out on the other end of this pandemic with my mental health and well-being and the mental health and well-being of my team and my family intact. Everything else became less important to me, and I prioritized that over everything else. And I believe that at the end of this pandemic, that will be the advantage. The advantage will go to those who have tended to these most human of needs, to those who have had more joy, more love, and belonging during this time, who have not succumbed to the sadness and the anxiety and the worry of this time. And so that's really what humans need to get through tough spots. We need each other. We need the connection. We need the belonging. And that is, in fact, what brings us joy. Loneliness is as deadly as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It'll take 7 years off of your life, and it will kill you to be lonely. We know this from the research. And so thinking about this time of connection and the opportunities that we have, even though we're farther away from one another, to find ways to be most closely connected. So I know we've overused this term unprecedented, right? But I want you to also think about that that we're in a defining moment in our world, in our communities, and in our families, and in our organizations. It's not just the pandemic, right? It's the racial uprising. It's the testing and reconfiguring of our systems and institutions, our democracy, our education system, our child welfare system, are the ways in which we respond to and tend to our environment. We are living in a once in a generation event. And that was true when it was only the pandemic. It was true when it was only the pandemic. And then we came into George Floyd's murder and the civil uprising that felt there. So this once in a generation event is shaping the next several decades of how we will live and work. It's shaping the minds of our young people. It's shaping our families. It's shaping how we will show up in the world. And we are currently writing this storyline together, this collective storyline that will affect things for years and years to come. Everything is up for grabs. I don't know about you, but every time I open my email or pick up my phone, I'm like, what now? Because it could frankly be anything. I'm really done being surprised, right? And that's really unsettling and completely exhilarating at the same time. Our challenges are adaptive, so there's no rule book, there's no expert in how to do this. There's no manual, there's no right way. We are together deciding how we want things to be in our families, in our world. So during today's short time together, I'm going to ask you to think a little bit more deeply about this, about the ways in which we're living together, what we're prioritizing, how we're showing up, and to consider important questions about what you need to thrive, what we collectively need to thrive. And I'll encourage you then to use the chat feature. You'll see kind of bubbles, slides pop up as I ask questions to guide through thinking about these new ways of being and living together. Let me just pause for a second and say, does that resonate with you? Do you feel the things I'm feeling? Do things feel as they do to me, that we're living through a time where anything can happen, which is shaking the base of under our feet and also creating such opportunity up before us? Anybody want to share anything about how that's resonating for them? Okay, I'll give you a chance in chat on that too. So thanks for that. So near the beginning of the pandemic, there is a Minnesota songwriter, Dan Wilson. You probably know a lot of his songs, but he released a new song at the beginning of the pandemic. It's called "The Right on Time Right Now." The song asks us to commit to new ways of being together on the other side of this experience. And here's how a few of the words go. We've never been tested or took a test like this yet. We've never been taken to the limit, showing the edges of the beyond when there's nothing more. And if the questions were the best, we could imagine, would we be blamed for the ending as a twist? Because the real question is, what if we survive this? What if we make it? Then you and I have got to make promises, to make new promises, because we've never been broken down to the ground, not like this before. And when we wish we could only see the morning, do you think we could have made a bigger wish? So the question is, what if we survive this? Right? So I want you to think about that idea of, living through these times where we are worried about our safety, we are sequestered and trying to keep ourselves safe from the pandemic, and thinking about when life returns to, and I'm putting in air quotes, normal, because the old normal's gone and the new normal's not yet written. I asked you to think about this for a minute. What new promises will you make on the other side of the experience? Or another way to say that is, how do you want things to be different on the other side of this experience? Have you given thought to how your life might be different? For example, I've been thinking a lot about, I never want to go back to traveling how I was traveling. I like being home more often. I like doing more tuck-ins and more preparations for dinner and experimenting with recipes. But I really miss traveling. I love being with a group of people. And so I'll still do some, but not as much. Are there things that you have thought about? If you could just add in the chat anything you're thinking about as we're crafting this new way together, right? I really want to do things differently in this way. Could you do just a minute of that to think and to put in the chat? Anything you think about moving forward in your life or in the world? It doesn't have to be about your personal life. What are the new promises we might make to ourselves and to one another on the other side? Might we be kinder? Might we do a better job of staying connected? Might we tell people more frequently how we feel? Might we think about ways that the pandemic has really disproportionately impacted children and families of color? Might we find ways to work in more just and equitable ways with people? Think about what that might be. And so, um, thinking about continuing to prioritize family and thinking about, Molly's thinking about connecting with people intentionally, right? And being more grateful, seeing extended family more to be sure that we really connect. Those are all great ideas. More intentionality. We kind of got woken up a little bit to living life on purpose. The things we took for granted for so long have really been shaken and moved in new ways. And so thinking about with intention and how do we show up and live. And there might be some of you who are thinking to yourselves, Amelia, like, I don't think you get it. I've got nothing left after living through 2020. Stop talking to me about what else I'm going to do differently or new. Like, I'm a shell of myself, and getting up every day is some kind of heroic act over here in my house. You might be feeling that way too. And I want to introduce a term to you that I was recently gifted from a colleague. And this is an ancient Greek word, acedia. Acedia really named some of what I was feeling in 2020. It was used to describe the experience of monks who spent time in isolation. They were sequestered away from everyone, and they did not even hear the sounds of their own voices. And so they spent an enormous time in profound isolation. And it might be that you might be experiencing acedia. Acedia is described as grief, boredom, listlessness, mental fatigue, and spiritual sloth. So it's not really depression. It's a numbing. It's a dulling of the fire in you, of the joy in you. And you might be feeling like, after what we have lived through, that there has been a dampening of your spirit, which is acedia. It's a combination of those feelings. But what is really important to note is that there is a kind of mental hygiene you can perform. There are antidotes to acedia. And I want to talk about today what some of those antidotes to acedia might be. Because it is a treatable condition. So here are some of my most favorite research-based and personally experienced, antidotes to acedia. And they are sleep and rest. And I pull them out separately on purpose because it's not just sleep. If you just sleep and you sleep all day, you're also not going to have a restoration of your spirit. It's sleep and rest. So rest from your tasks, maybe rest from certain people. It might be taking a break from doing something hard. It might be for you really giving a worry a rest. setting a burden down. So definitely sleep. I'm somebody who I have a top 5 things that get me through, and sleep is number 1 on the list. I will be someone who will walk through the house and start turning off all the lights. Time for everybody to go to bed. I just make it dark, and then they're bumping into things and they decide it's better to go to bed. So really encourage you to get your sleep, but also to think about rest, which also might be a change of scenery, a change of thought, a change of connection for you. I'll offer to you a practice of gratitude, which is really feeling grateful and noticing the good. I have a favorite journal on this, the 5-minute gratitude journal, 5 minutes a day. But what I want to tell you about this is that the evidence behind gratitude is compelling, right? They have found, Mayo Clinic did a study, and a gratitude practice had better impact than therapy and medication for their doctors for anxiety and depression. And so I can't say enough about an intentional gratitude practice. And the gratitude journal will give you 3 minutes in the morning and 2 at night to think about this. And, you know, even if you just do it on a Post-it note next to your bed. I have a friend who writes down one thing for which they're grateful for each day, has a little jar on her bedside table, folds them all up, and on New Year's Eve reads them all every year. So it doesn't have to be a big old deal. It can be a 5-second thing a day. But the thing is that, you know, you will pay attention to something. And so the intention is to really focus in on what's going well, because friends, what you go looking for, you will find. And if you want to make the case that life is awful, you can make it pretty easily. Take a look around. And if you want to make the case and train your brain to say, life is amazing, it's amazing, and amazing things happen all day long for which you can be grateful, then you train your brain to do that. And it is a practice. It's like building a muscle. And so it's something you have to do with intention. It's making me think about a story that I hadn't planned to tell, but I will, of how that shows up in regular life. We have a sun porch in our house that the roof leaks no matter what we do. I think we have had 5 repairmen out, and as soon as we plaster it up and we think we've solved it and we paint it, the roof leaks, and we can't figure it out. And so one day the rain was coming in the sunroom, and I called my husband pretty exuberantly because I have so had it with this roof that I just decided to think about it differently. And so it's raining, and I called the kids and my husband. I'm like, get in here. You're not even going to believe what's happening here. I want you all to come see. Do you see the roof is leaking? Isn't this amazing? The roof is leaking. And my husband's like, of course it is. It leaks all the time. I said, no, what you don't understand is this. The roof is leaking. This means we have a roof. It means we have a house, we have safe housing. We actually have a bucket because this has happened before, so we can capture the rain. It's not going to go all over our house. Do you know what else we have? We have homeowners insurance. We have the ability to pay the deductible. And so this is a reminder to us today, family, how lucky we are. Look at us. We have a roof. And so sometimes the roof leaks, right? And so thinking through that in that way, rather than like, are you kidding me? We just had that fixed again. How much have we spent on this roof? I can't take it anymore. You know, you could just really go down that spiral, or really be thinking about a gratitude frame for that. There are opportunities to be grateful all the way around. And I know you don't want to live with me. It drove my husband crazy too, but those are the things I try to do to get to it. Here are some others. Contemplative practices. These are things that take you out of your present moment thinking. They are meditation, they are yoga, they're playing musical instruments, things that you can't think about your worries and do them. So during our COVID home officing and homeschooling, my daughter decided she wanted to quit piano. She's been asking me for 7 years. I told her when she turned 13 she could quit. And then as I was telling the teacher, you know, Josie quit, Noah will continue with lessons, but Josie won't be joining you. Out of my mouth came, I'm going to do it instead of her. I don't know how it happened, but I signed up for the lesson. I took her spot. And so I've been taking piano lessons for the last 4 or 5 months. And in that practice, if I am thinking about anything else besides the piano, I can't do it. I get all messed up. I lose my place. I can only be here, right? And that kind of a mindful, contemplative practice is really good for your brain. It goes back to the one I talked about earlier around rest. You kind of set aside your worries and you're just here with the piano. That'll bring me over to the other one I'll tell you, which is novelty and play. And I want to talk about novelty and play for a minute, because if you want a true antidote to acedia, a true antidote to the spiritual numbing that can happen from isolation and boredom, it's novelty. Our brains crave it, right? So playing the piano is new for me and it brings me great joy. But I've been super intentional about how do we do that with the kids. So we had to cancel our spring break. I cleaned out the entire living room and put up a tent. We put up an 8-person tent and we went camping. We were supposed to be in Yellowstone. Oh, well. So we camped in our living room. I've let them do all kinds of things we would never let them do. They spent the night in the car in the garage, right? We watched movies outside on the garage door, and we've done, you know, picnics, a wicknicks, a winter picnic inside, and cooked hot dogs on the fireplace, and had potato salad and a blanket spread out in the living room. So we're doing things that are novel because it's part of our human spirit, is that spark of joy and novelty, like something new. So every weekend I think, what are we going to do new we've never done? Hike a new trail, play a new game, go to a new place, meet a new person. What is new? Think in your brain, new, new, new. Your brain needs it. And the way we get anxious or sad or have boredom or start getting negative and nitpicky because things feel so heavy is when we forget to play and when we forget to bring in novelty into our life. So think about, what can you do that's new? What can you bring forward into your life? New ways of, every time we go to the store, drive a new way, right? Uh, think about switching your places at the table for dinner. Just the little things. I have rearranged the furniture in this entire house. It's driving my husband crazy. But I rearranged furniture, just to think about bringing that novelty, because man, oh man, we can really get to a place where it gets very dull drummy to be in this way of living. Movement is super important too, and it can often go with this other one, time in nature. So we get outside for walks, we go on nature hikes, even when it's freezing. I'm in Minneapolis. I don't know if I mentioned that, but we had the grandkids over last weekend, outside by the fire pit to cook pie irons. They call them pudgy pies in Minnesota and Illinois, where I'm from. They said pie irons. We had those for lunch on a Saturday, just so we could be outside together, right? So think about, how do you get time in nature and how do you move your body in, and that breathing air that's not just inside your house, which we used to take for granted, is really important to awaken your brain in new ways. So we've talked about all of them except the most important, which is connection. So Jamie mentioned in the beginning, I have a TED Talk, a TEDx talk on the human need for belonging. And that is incredibly important to our human thriving and surviving. And so as you think about, what do I want to do differently in 21? How do I get through this time? I want you to turn your attention to strengthening and deepening relationships. There's really nothing you can do that will improve your well-being, that will improve your ability to thrive, more than deepening your human connections. I once saw this world-renowned cardiologist, and he was telling us all about spinach and antioxidants and blueberries and superfoods, and he at the end just set his mic down and said, I'm gonna tell you the most powerful science there is, the most important tool for healing there is, and that's human connection. And so even, if you eat your blueberries and you do your exercise and you do all of the things you need to do to have heart healthy ways of living, The people who will live the longest are those who live in loving connections with others. That's why people who are married live longer, people who attend a spiritual practice live longer, because we are in loving connections to others. And that is a critically important part of human thriving. So I've shared with you some of my favorite antidotes to acedia, some of my favorite ways to get yourself into the well-being and thriving mindset for this upcoming year. Having come off of the year we all just came off of together, and we've got more in front of us. And as I shared mine, now I'm, as promised, going to ask you to share yours. So what are your antidotes? If you can put those in chat. What are the things that you do to ensure that you are ready to go, that you can take on whatever the heck 2021 is going to throw at us? Because I promise we're not done with the curveballs, right? We're not done. So in every situation, somebody's going to make it. Somebody will come out and be in a position where they're still able to thrive no matter what happened. How do you make sure you're one of them? What are your favorite techniques? So take a minute, put those in the chat, please. I want you to think about, what are the antidotes that you have to listlessness, spiritual dulling or numbing or boredom or grief or sadness or depression? What are the things that you focus in on? See a few of those coming in. Great. Just be thinking about, what is the thing you turn to? And then I want you to think, and which one of these are you not getting enough of? Which one of these antidotes are you not getting enough of? And think about, how might you get more of them or more of it? What are you not getting enough of, and how might you get more? Taking time to serve others. Hi, Doris. Walking with friends and calling people you used to vacation with. How might you still connect with them? Getting time outside, that hiking, reading, volunteering, yoga, group activities. We've been playing just hilarious, fun group activities with my ISU buddies on Zoom. Steve Smith, who some of you know, has made up Pictionary with words from our time together, and I have not laughed as hard as we do trying to guess what some of those words are, and drawing on whiteboards on Zoom. It's great. Reading more. Yeah, Juliana, good for moving furniture. I'm all about it. And walking a 5K in your house during lunch, right? Or outside, calling friends and being real intentional about that. Getting to bed on time, super important. Getting more rest it's just, I can't say enough about getting more rest. I do a lot of work in workforce well-being for child welfare workers and social workers. And I keep saying, all we would need to do is get people enough sleep. If we could just get the kids and the foster parents and the social workers to bed on time, it would solve half of the world's problems, I promise. Just everybody needs to get to sleep. And so I've got lots of remedies for that. I have a whole sleep tip sheet I use to help people get enough sleep, because as my pediatrician for my little ones used to say, if they're tired or hungry or sick, all bets are off. So don't even think about controlling the tantrum. They're tired, hungry, or sick. So just make sure they get enough sleep. You feed them on a regular basis, and that they're not ill. And then you can talk about the behavior. And we're all the same. I mean, for goodness sake, Snickers made commercials about this, how we're not ourselves when we're hungry, or when we're not ourselves when our basic needs are met, right? So that's just fundamental underpinnings of us being able to show up in ways that say, I'm going to take 2021 by the horns and live my best life. You're not going to do that if you're exhausted. So that's a fundamental one. I will recommend a book called Eat, Move, Sleep for that. Tom Rath, he's the Strengths Finders guy. And again, you might be saying, Amelia, I do not have time to read books. Have you seen my life? And I'll tell you, this book is 3 to 4 pages in 30 chapters. Each chapter is 3 to 4 pages. So you just read one a night. It's the best research on eating, well and moving and sleeping and the three-legged stool that goes together for those three. And in a month it's read. And then you have an answer to what are you reading, because you know you're only reading the first 20 pages of 12 books. And this one you can read all the way through because it's written that way. That's great. Okay, house projects and all of these thankfulness and gratitude practices here. This is great. Those are great ways to be thinking about the antidotes to what you're doing. And just a word too that you know, um, in these challenging times, there are a lot of things we can do and a lot of things that we can control to ensure our thriving. And this time is very special. I feel like I have to talk myself down once in a while from wishing it away and remembering how special this time is, that there are so many possibilities right now and so much meaning being made of this time, that instead of wishing it away, to think about it as a unique and important time in which we can make new decisions, we can find new ways of being together, and there are ways we can flourish if we're intentional about it. So I want to just share with you a few of my change frameworks that are favorite ways of me thinking about this. It's helpful for me to reframe the time as an important and unique time. And so I want to share a few of those with you. So this is William Bridges' model of transition. And this model of transition talks about things don't end and begin. Things end, and then there's a neutral zone, and then they begin. And this is really important. And you'll know this because if you've ever moved, it's like this. I know I'm moving. I've packed up all the boxes, but I'm not yet in my new place, or I might not even know where I'm going to yet. But I couldn't put my house back together even if I wanted to. I gave away things, I threw away things, I packed up things. So I'm in the neutral zone of not knowing. So if you think about this as, you know, it was our old normal, our temporary normal, and we're still creating our new normal, right? Of what's yet to be. And so neutral zones are ambiguous and scary and unsettling, but they are stage setting for new beginnings. They're times for us to pause and think about what might we need to do this in the new way. And our inclination is really to rush through this time, but it is in this discomfort where our growth happens. It's in this time where our contemplation and our building of reconsidering what's most important to us. What do we really want to do, right? If you think about relationships, this one ended. I know for sure this one's over. I don't know yet who I will be with, but in the middle, I'm analyzing and thinking about, I know I don't want that, but I will miss this part. And you're thinking about how to craft those new beginnings in the neutral zone. So just to be thinking about, what do we want to take with us into a new way, into the new year, into 2021? What do you want to take with you from 2020? And what do you want to leave behind? Right? It's a time for looking backwards to see what was essential, what did we value, what was foundational, what gave us meaning, and a time to think about for our new beginnings, what do we want to have more of in our life, and letting go of what we want to have less of. And so as we think about this and think about these new beginnings, think about, what do you want to take with you and what do you want to leave behind? Are there things you're ready to leave in 2020? And are there things that you learned or that you did or connections you made that you want to bring with you into 2021? To take a minute to reflect that. And if you're willing to add that to the chat, what might you want to bring forward with you? What do you want to make sure the new beginnings are made of? And to think about that for a minute, right? If you were, in fact, given this time of less busyness, less movement, if you were given this time of the interim where what we knew is ending and what we have yet to be is not yet created, what would you want to make sure that you focused on or brought forward in a new way of being together? leaving behind over planning and taking with me, spending more time learning new things. I just love that, Molly. That's so great, right? Leaving behind worry and taking forward, being in the moment. Right. That's great. Just leaving times for things to happen. Being so busy, leaving some of that behind, and more time for thinking about yourself and taking care of yourself. That's incredible. Thank you, Dr. Holmes. And just thinking about that, like, that's not going to happen on accident. That's going to happen with intention. And frankly, there's just nobody who can do that for you. Only you. Right? And that's really the burden and the power of it is only you. So cherishing those moments and not taking anything for granted. That's right, Jamie. So it gave us time to pause. Things we thought were for sure are not. And things that we could just take for granted, we no longer can. I can't tell you how much I miss hugging people. I'm going to be insufferable when we are able to hug people again. I'm going to be like, what happened to Amelia? She's so clingy. That's what people are going to be talking about me. And I didn't really, I mean, I was always a little bit of a hugger, but now I'm like, gosh, dang, I have a strong desire to be in connection with people again. That reserve is low. Less worry, more hope. Amen to that piece of it. That's for sure. So just thinking of it in those intentional and conscious ways help us to build better ways to thrive. This is one of my very, very favorite change frameworks. I love this so much. It was gifted to me from my mentor, Jack, who I lost a few years ago. But and it is on the wall of many change makers I've worked with around the country. But to think about this old way, new way slide, we call this, right? So when things are uncertain, it's our inclination to really go back to a safer, more familiar time. And this diagram kind of talks about this. So the way we were doing was all this way, all the old way, 100%. And we are scaling down our old way of being, where at the same time we're designing and developing what will the new way look like. And we are building and scaling that up. But that happens at the same time. So when you get to a certain point where you realize what was will no longer be, but what is no longer, or what is not yet, then you get to this part called the messy middle. And you can think about this for all of our systems. Think about it for our democracy. Think about it for a lot of things right now. We're in the middle of figuring out what will be. And the inclination is when it gets uncertain, when it gets messy, is to go back to the old way. We want to go back to how it was. There's a lot of focus on history, on nostalgia, on going back to where I knew the rules, where it was safe, because I don't yet know what this will look like. And our, the goal is, as many of our old systems and ways are changing in this way, is to really examine what were the assumptions upon which our old ways of being together were founded, right? If for example, in child welfare, we say, oh, well, we used to separate families because we were better safe than sorry. And as someone would say, well, who was safe and who was sorry when you did it that way? So what are the old assumptions upon which we did our work or lived our lives that have been really shaken up during these times? And all of our systems are changing. There's really nothing left untouched. So we are building these new ways forward together. And just thinking about this framework helps me to think, I'm right here. I'm in the interim. I'm in the messy middle. I'm in the neutral zone, right? I'm in a place where I'm figuring out how to do this next. And what do I need to be able to do it next? I need those antidotes that we talked about. I need the focus and intentionality. And so each year, I pick a word for the year. And this year it took me a long time. I wasn't really sure what it would be. My sister passed away on January 5th. The rush on the Capitol happened on January 6th. And I watched before me my hopes of 2021 being better than 2020 kind of dwindling. Like, oh no. I didn't expect it to be magically better, but it started off pretty rough, right? So I began to just think about what was ending and what was beginning, and to think about how I wanted to get unstuck from ways that were no longer serving me personally, ways that were serving my family, or ways that were serving our community. So I chose a new word this year. I'm not going to tell you yet what it is. I wonder, do any of you do that? Do any of you have a word for the year? Have you thought about your focus word for the year yet, or might you think about that? And if you had to pick one, maybe if you'd be willing to put in the chat what it might be. I'll tell you, over the years, I've used trust, I've used strength, I've used bravery. I've tried to find things to focus on, respond. Yeah, to do something, to respond. That's great, Greg. Anybody else have any other thoughts on words they might pick? Gratefulness, joy, resiliency, optimism. Pause is another one. That's a great one for the interim, for this neutral zone. Right? Those are great, impactful. And I actually, here I have one here from a previous year. I can show you. It's hanging right in front of my desk. I do things like this. Am I going to be able to do this with a background? No, yes, no. Here. It says trust. I put it in a frame and I hung it up in front of my desk because a few years ago, many years ago, actually, before I met my husband, I realized I need to figure out how to trust somebody or I'm going to be alone for a long time. So I focused that year on how do I go all in? How do I just put all my eggs in one basket, right? And so that was that year. This year, I have a word that finally came to me, and that is something I'm thinking about, which is catalyze. I really want to think about how to move things forward in better ways. I want to be thinking about how to be a catalyst, how to be a catalytic leader, how to create conditions for change to occur, how to move things forward in positive ways. I put this in Pantone's color of the year. Every year they announce colors. And this year, their colors are illuminating yellow and ultimate gray, which is the contrast that I feel like we have been holding. These bright spots of amazing possibility and wonderful things. And this ultimate gray meaning, as sad or as hard as things can be. Right? We are holding both moments in contrast in this interim. And so this is why they said they picked these colors. It's the union of an enduring ultimate gray with the vibrant yellow illuminating expresses a message of positivity supported by fortitude, practical and rock solid, but at the same time, warming and optimistic. It's a color combination that gives us resilience and hope, which we all need. We need to feel encouraged and uplifted, and this is essential to the human spirit. And so I'm holding these two in contrast. I'm holding this idea of hope and optimism and understanding the work that we really have left to do to build new and better ways together, right? Because everything is really being disrupted. It's time for reexamination globally and nationally and in our communities and in our own lives. So as we think about this time, it gives us permission to go back, to think about what worked, to think about our reason and our meaning for being, to go back to old relationships, to heal old wounds, both personally and professionally, to go back to asking new questions and creating new pathways and imagining new outcomes. There are things, friends, that I will miss about this time. There are things that I will really miss. I will miss being able to be home as much as I have been, to being able to share as many meals as I have been, to have to be so intentional about connecting with people that when we do connect, it's an enormous joy. Yeah, to ways in which I have found things for which to be grateful. Right. Someone gave me for a wedding a picture I have in my room that says, "Remember this." It's Marcus Aurelius. "Remember this: very little is needed for a happy life. Very little is needed for a happy life." And as we have had much stripped away, that has really come into focus for me. What do we really need to be happy? I can toss out all the living room furniture and put up a tent. I don't need to go to Yellowstone, right? We played in the beginning of the pandemic, bowling with toilet paper rolls out in the front of our house. Like, we just made up games. We did things to play. Very little is needed. And so as we think about that, as we think about moving through this time of the interim, as we are still in, but moving through, I ask you to think about this idea of, what do you really want to remember? I keep telling, pay attention. Your grandkids are going to be doing a report on this for school, and they're going to ask you what it was like. And so for the first 3 months of our quarantine, I had them write a daily journal that they hated me for so much. But writing down, like, what does it feel like? What's different? What's the same? What is going on inside of your body in terms of how you're feeling about this time together? And so I ask you to kind of think about, what do you want to remember about this time? What do you want to remember about the interim? What do you want to remember about all that is shifting and changing in the world right now? And if you are to tell this story in a decade or two, or 3 if we're lucky, right? What might you tell? What might you want to remember about this important time? I'll ask you to throw that in the chat if you have a minute, or you can just unmute and say it. But is there